In the name of the one true and living God. Amen. Please be seated. The English poet, by the way, good morning. Happy winter. At least it waited until after Thanksgiving, I suppose. The English poet William Blake once wrote, "I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. I sought my neighbor and found all three." Today, in some parts of the church, is known as the Feast of Christ the King. Instituted in 1925 by Pope Pius XI, the feast day was created as a sort of counterpoint, a reclaiming, if you will, of the world's attention and allegiance. At that time, ultranationalist and secularist authorities had risen in the world's powers, and the Pope wanted to reclaim some space. Perhaps not my first strategy, but what do I know? I'm no Pope. He instituted a feast day. While the order of what comes first seems slightly unclear, also at this time was the Cristeros War in Mexico, an overflowing of tensions between the government of the day and the religious folk, especially Father Miguel Agustin Pro, who ran a clandestine ministry that cost him his life. As the story goes, when he was put to death, arms outstretched in a cruciform shape, it is said that the only thing he said was this: "Viva Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King." Inspired by his example, some say Pope Pius set aside this day to make that claim boldly. But this kind of king, the one where Jesus reigns, is nothing like anything the world knew, nothing like anything the world had seen nor will see. There is no doubt that in 2023, the most powerful and loudest voices, or at least the ones who capture our media's attention with great success, often want to pull us away from the beliefs we profess when we gather in this place. The ones we know from and have given our lives to in following the Savior of the world. Nationalism is present in our own century too, in the form of white and allegedly Christian nationalism. The path of violence to establish domination and control and authority seems upheld as the only way forward. Fear and suspicion of our neighbor has caused us to be certain that someone else is coming to take what is ours, so we better hold on tighter, and to be paranoid or distrusting when someone extends a hand in genuine care and compassion. In the kind of world where ideals and practices such as these reign and rule, isolation becomes paramount. Finding those who look like and believe like us is central. Individualism becomes the way. But none of these, precisely none of these, are found in the way of Jesus we follow. Exactly zero of these ideals and practices reign and rule when Christ is King. The reading from Matthew's Gospel for today picks up as a culmination of the apocalyptic end of the world readings we have been hearing a good deal of lately. As we look toward Advent, which begins next Sunday, the church's readings have already begun to point us to the end of the age when all things are restored to Jesus, and he comes again in what is called the Second Advent. Today's reading, a parable of sorts, describes Jesus as seated on the throne and calls him a king. But unlike any ruler of the world, whether in his day, in this day, or in any other, it seems that all of the nations of the world, which is to say those from every corner, every known corner, were present. And some had been separated into sheep and goats, sheep being the desired designation if you were present for that particular moment. Jesus looks at them and gives them an invitation that I believe he gives us here and now too, and he says, "Come. Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Draw near and discover this kingdom, this new way, this restored and good and holy and graceful way that has been in creation for you, even you, since the world took its shape. Come." It's a remarkable invitation for one seated on a throne, and not at all one that is familiar from those seated in similar places that we all too often hear. But the true beauty of this invitation lies in the word blessed. Circle back in your minds to much earlier in Matthew's gospel when Jesus is standing on a lush green hillside next to the Sea of Galilee. Thousands have gathered around him, and having fed them from what seemed like very little that he miraculously multiplied, he gives what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. It is there that he lays out a vision of this kingdom he now invites you, us, the world to share in. It is there that he says the blessed ones are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake and who are reviled for their faith. The blessed ones are those who mourn, those who are poor. As the gospel unfolds and we hear more from Jesus on the blessed ones, we hear him say that those who follow him may be hated by this world for just how countercultural they will be. And in the kind of world where Christ is king, the blessed ones are those who do not return violence for violence, but bear witness to another way by serving others. Blessed ones are the ones who have enacted God's steadfast loving kindness promised for all, and who have done so especially for the poor and forgotten, the lost and the last and the least. Remember, too, that the ones who get to glimpse the kind of kingdom Jesus brings to earth first, the kind of kingdom he will bring again, are the sick, the suffering, the lost, those who had their ailments healed and their fullness of life restored, the despised who receive a welcome after only being rejected, the hungry who are fed, the hopeless who get a glimpse of the possible, the hated who receive love. And the kind of reign where Jesus is king, these are the blessed ones. These are the ones who are accounted on the inside. These are the ones who receive promise of life abundant. It seems to me that the welcome to come and share in this kingdom is a big and a wide and a generous one for all. It is also clear, though, that participation in such a reign asks quite a lot of us. One of those simple to understand but quite challenging to inhabit calls from Jesus. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Unaware that they had even done so, they ask him, well, when? When did we do that? When was it that we fed you and gave you something to drink and visited you and welcomed you and gave you clothing? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it for the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. For those who first heard these words from Jesus, it seems that they did not understand that it was in serving the poor and the cast aside and extending compassion and care, in finding the lost and enacting hope for the despairing, and remembering the forgotten, that they did so for Jesus himself. But not so for us. Not so for us. We have the story. We know the instructions. They are quite clear. The invitation is quite straightforward, and the added layer of spiritual discipline of seeing such folks as Jesus could not be stated for us in starker terms. But if we are honest, we will admit to ourselves that we still struggle with this. We still might not want to follow these instructions or live into this call. We get frustrated that folks seem to not be willing to make the good or right choice as we determine it to be, to get their life on a better course. We know how hard we have worked for what we have, and we think they should too. We find ourselves thinking if they could just do this better, or choose that better, or be better, everything would take care of itself. I did it, why can't they? The temptation to fall into the values and principles espoused by the powers of this world that pull us towards scarcity and fear and suspicion, well, those temptations are strong and those voices are loud. A few years back, I was presiding and preaching at a small midweek Eucharist at Trinity Cathedral in Omaha. This text was the gospel text, and I was preaching about the invitation I had heard from a friend to take on the spiritual discipline of saying every single person I see, consciously saying every single person I see, whether they need something from me or not, whether they are just walking by on the sidewalk or down the grocery store aisle or having a full conversation with me, whether they have a house and food and drink or not, to see them all as Jesus himself, and to call that to mind each and every time I saw someone. By the way, try that practice on sometime, and let me know how it goes. It was then, right as the short homily ended, that a man who we knew well from our free lunch program and from just being a neighbor on the street around the cathedral walked down the center aisle of the church, carrying all of his bags, carrying all of his needs, carrying really the weight of the world. And knowing myself well enough to know how all too often I think and feel like the way I've described before, I found myself taking no small amount of joy in the ways that God works. This man needed what he usually did, and so he sat and worshiped with us first, and then we helped him as we did. And I learned the same lesson I have had to learn over and over, and surely will have to learn again soon. I have never really had the words of Jesus smack me in the face quite like that before, and I haven't since, but I'll never forget it. You see, if we are going to be citizens of the kind of kingdom that Jesus brought to this world and seeks to continue to bring through us, our call is to live our lives, as Professor Joy J. Moore says, as the embodied demonstration of the grace of God. To live our lives as the embodied demonstration of the grace of God. Now, I know that a kingdom like this makes little, if any, sense to a world that upholds power in the ways ours does. Power like Jesus's, a reign and rule like his, it confounds this world. But the way that we follow is not the way of this world, but a way of love, a way of hope, the way of Jesus. It is the way that follows a king not found in halls of power, but whose birth we soon celebrate in a forgotten town to unwed teenagers in a dirty barn, because the world could not make room for him. Let us give our lives to making room in our hearts and in this world for a king such as this. Let us give our lives day by day in allegiance to a king such as Jesus, and how we serve and love and care for all. And if we do, when we do, we will come to see that though we may seek our souls and not see them, though we may seek God and find God eluding us, it is when we seek our neighbor, when we seek the very person of Jesus who reigns as king forever, and who dwells in each place and person we meet, even the least of these. When we seek our neighbor there, we will surely find all three.